I'm Matt at Nexus Baseball, and this is episode 33 of the Tommy John Epidemic. This series is a YouTube read of content from the book Plague of the Gods, an outsider's perspective on baseball's Tommy John Epidemic, which is available now on Amazon. I decided to put this content on YouTube to make the material as accessible as possible. This series examines the science behind the most superhuman action the human body can produce, accelerating a baseball up to 100 miles per hour. The third potential source of valgus stress, and most likely the most prevalent across baseball, is the recruitment in the pitching motion of large superficial muscles to do the work of the rotator cuff and serratus muscles in the upper torso. The biggest culprit is using the latissimus dorsi, or lower back muscles, to pull the arm down and internal rotation. As discussed in the previous chapter, the lat's primary responsibility in the pitching motion should be one of stability, stabilizing the core and allowing for proper serratus function. This is due to its long fiber length, poor insertion point on the bone, and long activation times, making it a poor choice for the quick, coordinated motions of the baseball pitch. Unfortunately, many baseball pitchers are using extremely strong lat muscles to assist in velocity gains instead of training the correct muscle groups. There are two primary ways the lat is used improperly in the throwing motion. The first is when the arm is brought behind the body. It can be flexed to compensate for poor rotator cuff function. In this case, when the pitcher drives with the hips, the lower back goes into early and aggressive lumbar extension, or rounding, even before the hips have finished turning. The arm is then pulled up through cock as the back is arched due to the lat contraction, instead of a proper serratus stretch, and combines commonly with the hard front foot strike of the previously described crash. As the arm is pulled back, the lat is maximally flexed, allowing the arm to resist rotation and creating a greater transfer of forces from the legs to the arm. Rather than a rotator cuff stretch response, the arm is held back statically. When the arm comes forward, the lat muscle recoils from its flex, allowing the arm to fly forward, usually in a more over-the-top motion to lengthen the lat as much as possible. The lat then contracts again as the arm is flying forwards of the body to help pull the now forward arm into internal rotation and ball release. At this point, the lat can also accomplish the improper second function, which is pulling the arm downward with as much force as possible. This is the most damaging component and usually, but not always, is seen with the first component. As the arm is traveling over the top and into ball release, the lat can then flex to pull the arm down towards the ground and can add a strong pull-down force to the baseball. In a proper motion, the arm is moving centrifugally around the torso into pronation and ball release. This lat contribution occurs as the catapult force peaks and pulls the arm downwards. This kicking in of extra muscle can add velocity as well as compensate for poor mobility, which are the primary reasons it is used, but creates tremendous valgus stress. The arm is being pulled downwards from the humerus or the upper arm bone, forcing the muscles and ligaments to bounce the arm through multiple planes of motion against one of the most powerful muscles in the body. A hallmark of this approach is the necessity of having the elbow forward of the body and on a downward track just before ball release. Over-the-top high arm slot throwing is a strong correlation to this phenomenon and is usually accompanied by some degree of collateral tilt or sideways bend of the torso. This sideways tilt is also accompanied by falling off to the glove side on follow-through, as the hips are usually on an angle to get the ball to be more north-south in orientation. The reason for this is that the lat is again primarily designed to do pull-ups and inversely pull-downs. The more the arm can be upright and free, the more the lat can stretch and flex to pull the arm downwards towards the plate in a chop pattern. The reason for this positioning is that the lat connects to the bottom side of the humerus, and in this position the forearm would have to already be fully pronated, turned in towards the thumb to have the palm facing forward. This doesn't allow the subscapularis to fire with as much effect. Due to this, the lat works much less effectively when throwing from a lower arm slot. If the lat were to fire in a low arm slot, it would simply pull the arm down unnaturally, leading to a miss and a slower throw rather than a faster one. The pitcher usually needs to use the crash technique or be pulling off to the side into collateral tilt or sideways lean to make use of the lat's power. Interestingly, this hand positioning is also very effective at throwing sliders with a slightly off-angle hand position that allows the fingers to get off to the side of the baseball to create sideways rotation. The slider, when thrown in this manner, usually has a characteristic downward rather than sideways break that is indicative of the over-the-top lat thrower. Not only is using the lat muscles in this manner a terrible stressor on the arm by moving it through different planes of motion, it is also a source of a great deal of ineffectiveness in locating the strike zone. The lat is a huge muscle and difficult to control with precision. A little too much or too little flex as the arm is coming over the top and you miss up or down. A little too much pronation or too little and you miss side to side. As this technique has become more and more commonly utilized by pitchers to throw as hard as possible, one of the side effects has been an increase in inaccuracy. The coordination of using such a big muscle that can lift a 200-pound man against gravity to assist in throwing a 5-ounce object is the equivalent of using a cannon to hunt rabbits. You can do it, but it's very hard to do with precision, and a relatively small mistake can lead to injury. Not only is lat throwing hard on the UCL, but is also hard on the shoulder as well, and requires powerful external rotators to decelerate the downward pull of the lat. The common follow-through of either style of lat thrower is the arm ramming downwards towards the body instead of around the torso towards the back leg, as in the classic follow-through. Usually, because the back is already engaged, the thrower almost stands up, especially with a crash foot strike and the arm cut off in front of the torso. This style of throwing doesn't seem to be developed even with the direct goal of throwing with the lat, but instead as a response to pitching coaches looking for an over-the-top motion, or as a result of trying to increase velocity by developing the superficial muscles. If a youth or high school pitcher isn't throwing hard enough to be drafted, the first response by virtually all trainers is to get stronger. So they hit the weights and develop a significant increase in body mass and musculature through a muscular hypertrophy program. This hypertrophy will always be developed first and most significantly in the biggest muscles. With their newfound muscular power, the biggest muscles will always win out, in this case the lats. As they pull down ball after ball, they get better at timing the lat pull down in relation to the rest of the motion. They hyperdevelop the lower back, usually developing a tilt of the pelvis backwards, as the lower back becomes more dominant than the front abdominal muscles. The shoulder blades sit depressed as the humerus is held down by the lats at rest. The comparatively weak abdominal muscles allow the ribcage to wing off and stick out, inhibiting serratus control and requiring more and more leg power to create force, as the rotator cuff becomes weaker in relation to the lat. This pattern is quite common in baseball and is essentially an adaptation of the body to throwing the baseball with the lats and leg power instead of the rotator cuff and serratus muscles. As the muscles develop even more, the less the range of motion of the thrower, and the more the shoulder and upper back stabilizer muscles develop incidentally, including the upper trapezius and deltoid muscles. To overcome this decreased range of motion and to beat out the stabilizing effect of the tighter muscles, ever more lat and leg power is required. This is not to directly contribute force to the baseball, but power through the restrictions of one's own body. Ironically, this pattern does not result in greater maximum velocity than proper centrifugal throwers per se, but instead presents a quicker path to velocity in general. When combined with sport-specific resistance training, such as weighted baseballs, athletes without particularly strong motor control or flexibility or range of motion can achieve very high throwing speeds, making this approach favored by many velocity training programs. All of this is at the price of massively increased exertion as well, with the pitcher tiring quickly from having to flex most of the big muscles in the body as hard as possible to generate force, rather than a more targeted approach. This is one of the reasons two contemporary pitchers of similar stature might throw 98 miles per hour, with one falling into exhaustion after a few throws, while the other might be able to throw a complete game without breaking a sweat. Join me for episode 34 next week. Remember, if you like the content, please like and subscribe. Your support makes this work possible. Also, if you want to jump ahead, please consider picking up the book on Amazon from the link in the description below. See you next week.